So let's kick off. I'm Kate. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm Service Design Lead on GovUK, and I'm in a team called Modelling Services, amongst other teams. I'm sort of at large on GovUK, and we wanted to talk to you a bit and sort of spread the word about what we're doing, because a lot of people are getting pointed in my direction with challenges that they're facing on the services that they're developing, and a lot of those things feel like they might be answered by the navigation that we're developing. So time to spread the word and time to talk about what we're doing to build end-to-end services on GovUK. But first, some context. Why are we doing this work? Well, this is an extract from the government transformation strategy, which applies to all of the work that we're doing across government. And the first point of that is design and deliver joined up end-to-end services, and it commits to doing that by 2020. We also have a vision for the GovUK programme within GDS, and point one of that vision is to provide coherent services that are easy to discover and use. So that's what we're aiming to do. But in order to do that, the first problem we need to address is this. It's actually really hard to find things on GovUK. So we need to present users with consistent ways to orientate and navigate on GovUK. So let's say this is GovUK. All the dots are pages on GovUK, and users are looking for that specific blue dot there in the middle somewhere. In reality, there are about 400,000 pieces of content on GovUK so far. That number is ever increasing by, I think, a couple of thousand a week. And the way that GovUK evolved, we moved quickly and we sort of bodged things together a bit. It's led to a situation where content has been split up into specialist policy areas, mainstream browse, lots of different formats. There's lots of inconsistency and silos between content, transactions, forms, and this makes it really hard for people to find what they need to do the things that they need to do. So to fix this, we've started off with using the content's metadata. So we know who has published something or who's put a transaction online and when they've done that, but not much else. And on top of that, we're building a topics taxonomy for all of GovUK. And by organising our content into a taxonomy of topics, we're able to divide up content by what it's about, rather than like arbitrarily dividing it into the mainstream and Whitehall categories that we have now, or who's published it. So we can use that taxonomy as a foundation to improve navigation, orientation and search, and it allows you to see everything the government has published about a particular subject, which is a really great start, but obviously it doesn't help everybody, and a lot of people are coming to GovUK because they're trying to do a thing. And that's where we come to service-based navigation, and that's what we're doing on the Modelling Services team. So we're building navigation that guides users through sets of tasks so that they can do a thing. And this is to help them beyond the sort of one-off things they might be trying to do, and looks at them more broadly and how they fit into that broader process. So you might come to GovUK trying to get a provisional driving licence, but that's actually because you want to learn to drive a car. And what we're doing is connecting all the stuff around the driving licence application into that broader journey. Just on a side note, what do we mean when we say service? Because there's lots of different understandings of the term service, and we use service when we're talking about sort of transactional services, we use the term end-to-end services, and obviously that question is quite relevant when we're talking about the navigation for services and what we're doing. So there's been some research done recently by the services programme at GDS, where they asked people across government what do they mean when they say the word service. And some of us think of services as the end-to-end transactions, often the digital transactions that sit behind the start page on GovUK. But the scope of an end-to-end transaction that can also be described as a service, and this could be the online and offline steps a user needs to go through to do a specific thing. For others, a service is broader than a discrete transaction with a clear end, but for some it's actually everything that they need to do to achieve their goal online, and this can be made up of multiple online and offline transactions. But actually there's a growing understanding that a service is a coming together of all of these things. It contains everything a user needs to do to achieve their goal, including all of the non-transactional things they need to do, such as research, choosing how to achieve their goal, making choices about which options are most appropriate for them. It could even be a series of user journeys over time, sometimes across a number of years for a user to achieve their goal. Or it might even be just one or two short journeys in a very small space of time. But this understanding of services relates to the work that the services program is doing now to help departments to work on things like these sort of whole services. And there's things like the changes to the service standard that reflect this model, and the work being done by service communities team that reflects this model in helping departments to look at things from this cross-government whole service perspective. So for users to achieve a real-world goal, the goal here, goal complete, to achieve that, things like learning to drive a car or starting a business, the user needs to know all of these things. They need to know everything they'll need to do, when they can start, the order that they need to do those things in, how long it's going to take, what they will need to provide in order to complete each step of that process, and how much the process is going to cost, or how much the different steps within the process are going to cost. And if guidance and transactions aren't joined up, users don't know what to do. It's very hard for them to answer those questions for themselves. So they just call, or they jump straight into transactions that are inappropriate for them, and they're more likely to fail. So this is some data that we managed to dig up from the archives. In 2015, it was estimated that DVLA was spending about 19 million a year just answering calls where users were calling up saying, how do I do this thing? And this made up 2/3 of all of their departmental contact. And similarly, a quarter of their casework was the results of users finding the wrong form online and filling that in, not being able to find the right form for the thing that they were trying to do. So that's a problem. But because end-to-end services are made up of all these different component parts that help users to answer all of those different questions, and those component parts are sort of owned by different bits of government, departments on their own, in sort of departmental silos, can't create end-to-end services on their own. So as an example, the DVSA run a service to book a theory test, but this is one task within learning to drive a car, which is the end-to-end service. This end-to-end service, it starts with guidance about what age you can start learning, when you can get your license, and what you need to do, and then it guides you through to receiving your full driving license in the post. But that's split up across all different departments, and that's where GovUK comes in, because we're the home to all of your content and your services, so it's up to us to figure out how to join all of those bits and pieces together. So that's where we get to the step-by-step navigation that we are developing for services. Because on GovUK we can pull all of those bits and pieces together into the complete end-to-end journey. As I said, a single department can do this. Like even something like the learning to drive a car example, that's content and transactions from 4 different organisations. And actually thinking about GovUK as the sort of being in the best position to put all of this stuff together. If you built all of that information, guidance, and all of those transactions together into one big portal onto one service domain, it would be hidden from Google, it wouldn't be findable through GovUK, and things like guidance is where most journeys begin. They'll need different bits and pieces of guidance throughout their journey. So GovUK can stitch those together without departments having to hide them within a transaction, which is really great. So it's a kind of it's how we support services and digital transactions being sort of more lean and more specific, and helping users to do much more specific things and not do so much of the heavy lifting by themselves. So I'm going to show the thing. I'll show the thing that we've got live on GovUK, and I'll talk through some of the navigational elements that we've developed, and then I'll go into a bit more detail about what we've seen, sort of early data that's come back off that thing, and how we developed that, and what our next steps are with that. So we've published our first step-by-step navigation. Our first end-to-end service is Learn to Drive a Car. And we know that most users on GovUK don't come through navigation. They don't start on the home page. They will land directly on a piece of content or on a transaction. And particularly for the Learning to Drive a Car journey, the provisional driving license application is where a lot of users start. So we know that actually the navigation needs to be really strong on the pages of content and the transaction pages themselves, the start pages themselves. And what we need to do here is to show users that they are on a thing that sits within a process. We need to show them where they are within that process, and we need to give them a route to find things that they should have done before, or the things that they can do next, and a route to having an overview of that thing. So on the provisional driving license page, you'll see here that it is step 2 of the process of learning to drive a car, and actually step 1 is checking whether you're eligible. So we've got pretty much all of the content that was within that service model in the side nav here, so a user can sort of jump off into any direction based on where they are in the service. We've seen quite a good interaction with this side navigation so far, and I think in one sitting we've seen people use it. I mean, it doesn't sound like a high number, but about 2.5 times people will interact with the side navigation. But if you think about the journey of learning to drive, we probably wouldn't be expecting them to tackle more than 2 or 3 steps in one go. So that kind of makes sense for what users are trying to do. So here in the side nav, we've sort of highlighted where you are in the process, and we've highlighted what task you're actually about to do, what page this task helps you to do. Other elements of this navigation are things like where you have steps that can be completed simultaneously. So for example, when you're learning to drive, you can do driving lessons and practice, but you can also do preparing for your theory test at the same time. So we've tried to work out a sort of diagrammatic element to support the text and description in the content, to show the ordering of those steps and how users need to go through them to complete their end goal. What else can I show? John, what do you think I should show?
Sorry, I've been looking at the chat window. So
I can show you the main page of Learning to Drive a Car. This is all on live online, by the way, so you can go off and have a look at this yourself. I'll go to the main page. So we've got the side navigational element, and that side navigational element also on mobile. It flicks to the bottom of the screen. And we've done a lot of testing across desktop and mobile to make sure that works for both desktop and mobile users, because we know actually the split of device use is about 50-50. And that's something that we want to continue to improve. And then we also have the sort of home page for the end-to-end service as well, which is, in this example, it contains basically the same content as is contained in the sidebar, but it's a link that is shareable, so you could easily send this to someone to be like, here's the process for learning to drive a car. And there are other things that we want to think about here, like how someone might print this off as a checklist or download it, or there's lots of things that we want to do, but these elements are sort of complementary, and we know some people, especially people with different sort of accessibility needs, they prefer to navigate having a home page and going out to content and coming back again, because it gives them a much clearer, concise view of the process in one go, whereas some people are quite happy to use a side nav, and they're quite happy to have a lot of information on the screen at one time without having to sort of screen it out. So it's important that we have these two elements, that they're working together. We know there are elements of this that we want to improve as well. We were at DAC this week on Tuesday, getting it sort of accessibility audited with the professional testers they have there with access needs. So there are some things that we want to do with regards to different access technologies and how this works with them that we want to improve. We also tested with someone with learning difficulties, someone who has anxiety issues, and also in the lab we've tested with people who have ADHD and like focus issues, or or people who are dyslexic. So there's a lot that we've tested already, but we want to continue making sure that this pattern is accessible as possible for all the different people that might be wanting to navigate through gov.uk and use gov.uk services. Things that we've included as well, I'm just thinking, we've got, or maybe I'll talk from the top. So we've got, when you land on the page, you've got all of the steps very clearly laid out, very simply, and this is just to give you a quick snapshot view of the process as a whole. What we wanted to do was show the relationship between those steps. So when you can start each step, what the dependencies are between one step and another. So here you can start this step, most people can start this step when they're 17. There are some things that they can check within that step before moving on to getting your provisional licence. If I open driving lessons and practice, we've described you need a provisional licence to take lessons and practice, which is the previous step. So we're sort of always trying to explain the relationship between each step, but sort of chunking it up in a way that's logical for users and how they approach this journey. Something that we know is an issue that we want to look at this quarter is the clash in navigation between mainstream guidance, where they've got numbered chapters within the guides, and now the numbering of the steps within the process. Mainstream guides, not all of them are stepping people through a process, but where they are, these numbers kind of mimic or sort of are slightly off from the numbers that we are using to describe the process in the side nav. So we want to change how mainstream guides work. We want to work with the chapters, and maybe we're discussing various options here as to like actually breaking down chapters into individual pages, removing the numbering. This will make them actually much easier to use, not only easier to use in the service, in services and step-by-step navigation, but it will also mean that the individual pages within mainstream guides are much easier accessed through search, because we know some users are really specific with their search terms. They're looking for a really specific thing, like a user might look for using L plates. That won't come up as an individual page in our search results, but if we break up the guides it will. So this is something that we're exploring in this quarter. Other things to talk about. So when we mapped out this the service for learning to drive, we found a lot of useful content that we wanted to include in the step-by-step navigation, but there was a lot of other content that is related to the learning to drive journey and is quite specific to the learning to drive journey, but we don't think is the most useful stuff. So we went, well, we don't want to surface that in the navigation, but how can we make sure that people who land on that stuff and are therefore clearly in that journey of learning to drive a car, how can we get them to the content that's most useful and most relevant to them. So in cases like that, we've kind of classed this as secondary content. So it's related content, but it's not content that we've curated into the step-by-step. And on that content, we also have the step-by-step navigation down the side, so they can still find their way back to the most useful content that makes up that process. Other issues that we have covered I will come to later, but maybe if there are any more questions about how the pattern works, how the navigation works, we can come back to them later, so chuck them in the chat, unless there's any immediate ones that have come up now, John.
Well, one might be worth exploring
Yeah.
just a couple of times, which is the difference between this task list, the step-by-step version of the task list, versus the service manual task list pattern.
Yeah, good question, and that's come up quite a lot, and we need to be clear about that. I will come to that a bit later on in the talk, so never fear, because that's a very critical distinction. Anything else that's worth showing now?
No, I think we're all good. We can carry on and deal with it at the end.
Cool. All right, I've shown the thing. You can also go and have a look at the thing. Learn to drive a car on gov.uk. So, since we've put that live, it's the first one that we've put live. Since we've put it live, it's been used about 400,000 times in 8 weeks, which is pretty cool. And it's unlocking improvements to our search results. Within just a week, it was the top result for learning to drive a car, so people are using it, people are finding it useful. And it also means it's becoming the source of answers for services like Alexa, Siri and Google Assistant. And hopefully I can show you a little video of what happens when you ask Google a "how do I" question. Is this going to work?
How do I learn to drive a car?
Here's what I found on the web.
When can I start learning?
According to gov.uk, you can apply for a provisional driving licence when you're 15 years and 9 months old. You can start driving a car when you're 17.
So, pretty cool, and that's happening automatically based on what we've done so far, and that's something that we want to sort of explore more and optimize for, because we know more and more people are having in-home assistants or searching by voice. It's a very accessible way of doing search and explaining processes for certain types of users. So pretty cool, and something that we want to think more about and get better at. So hang on, this page. Oh yeah, so so obviously guiding user through complex processes step by step is a huge improvement to user experience. Like, all of this content, all of these transactions already exist on gov.uk. All we're doing is bringing them together on one page, and so we're hoping to get the get a divorce step-by-step process online soon. And this will be the first time that government has ever laid out the whole process of getting a divorce on a single page. And this process is not just the act of filing for divorce, but it's all the other stuff that can happen as a part of that life stage. So things like, well, what happens if you split up and you don't have anywhere to live? Or how does getting a divorce affect your benefits? Or things like that. There's a lot of stuff that sits around the process of getting a divorce that isn't specifically just the filing for the divorce itself. But what we're able to do is bring all of that together on one page, which is pretty exciting, and it's the first time that we've been able to do that. Here's another little video. Hopefully the sound's good enough on this one. It's quite quiet, but I mean, you've got the quote there, so you get the gist even if it's not.
I don't recognise this, but I like it. This makes it look like it's like a train ride. Like, do you get what I mean? It's like a train. It's like quite easy. Step 1, station 1, station 2, station 3. It's like, this makes it more like it's doable. Do you get what I mean? In my head, it's like, okay, it's quite straightforward and not so difficult. I like this. This is new, isn't it?
So that's someone who had tried to get divorced previously, and it had gone a bit pear-shaped. And she came into the lab and we were testing the new navigation with her. And from someone who'd previously found the process quite complicated, and was thinking that she would need solicitors to help her do a lot of it, and that would be a really costly process, she was now looking at this and going, oh, hang on, no, this, I like it. It actually makes it more doable. We haven't changed any of the content. All we've done is curate it, but it's already, even without changing the content, it's already impacting upon the user experience. And I think that's really exciting, is that through the navigation, even without content redesign, it's exposing those journeys that already exist, that users are already finding difficult to navigate through, and it's making those journeys and those processes feel like a more doable thing. So that's pretty encouraging, and that's pretty cool. And as my notes are telling me, it makes, by making complex tasks seem more doable, that has big implications for reducing departmental contact rates across government. You know, that big, like, 19 million figure we heard earlier. Hopefully this will have an impact on that. And, well, there are hundreds of end-to-end services we can build. And these can take you through almost every major life event, from registering a birth, sending your child to school, starting a business, to planning your retirement. And you know, these we've audited all the mainstream guidance on Gov.uk, and we sort of said, well, if we only looked at the mainstream guidance that covers like all of the big hitters, that's about 400 plus services that we could build navigation for. But obviously there's a lot of much more specific specialist processes that we could also map with this navigation, because this navigation works across all formats on Gov.uk. So who knows, it's like an innumerable amount. But I want to talk a bit more now about the fact that actually it's not just about navigational improvements, but actually how, like, this framework for building and modelling services can actually help us to target the transformation work that's going on across government, and that is also really exciting. And that's because actually building end-to-end services means that for the first time we can bring together end-to-end service performance data. So this is a mock-up that someone on the performance platform did, which is part of the services programme, and that's looking at how do we measure the success of services across government. And he took our model, and it's Chris Thomas who's done this, and he took the model that we have for learning to drive a car and has put data against the transactions, against the guidance and the content, so we can have a look at how things are working across that journey. This data can highlight key points of failure in our most important services, where digital interventions can have the potential to significantly reduce costs. And it's allowing us to sort of target the transformation work that we want to do to where it's most needed and where sort of biggest savings can be made. So there's potential for this to be a pretty big deal beyond just navigation. I just want to go back to the government transformation strategy for a second, because as you see, this actually helps us with the point 3 of the transformation strategy as well, which is a whole government approach to transformation. So no big deal. I'm quite excited. Just an example of that. So the Service Communities project are working with the Starting a Business community, which is across government. Like most end-to-end services, it crosses several departmental boundaries, but it's quite an extreme example because it covers at least 9 different parts of government. And each of these organisations owns like critical parts of this service, but they sort of each have developed their own divergent roadmaps of where they want to go and what they want to see, and they don't, at present or until this point, had no shared vision and no shared data around the service, the end-to-end service. So we don't have a way of knowing where the weak links are in that service, or any core services that government provides. And Data science can also help us find hidden gaps. So there's some network analysis going on of user journeys on gov.uk, which can show us where users are experiencing problems and dropping out of services, and it'll also show us where new services could be built and highlight sort of popular clusters of pages not yet presented as services, but which might be. So there's sort of stuff going on to sort of analyse the current state of affairs, but also through curating stuff into these end-to-end services, it will give us a better idea of going forwards where to tackle big problems and where those problems are. So I just wanted to sort of like summarise some of the stuff of like why I think this is cool and why I think it's exciting for service teams. It will allow you to see data across end-to-end journeys to help you target the work that you're doing or who you might need to work with. It could help you scope transactional services to start solving one whole problem or specific tasks across a user journey. It could help avoid the need to put too much guidance behind start pages because content and transactions will be better integrated. And it will give you much better routes into your services because the things that you're building will be more findable and users will be better prepared to start doing the thing that your services help them to do. So it's quite exciting. This is why I'm very excited about it. So I want to move on now. How are we doing for time?
It is 37 minutes past.
Okay, cool. I'll bash through this and then we'll get to some questions. I want to talk to you a bit about how we've developed the step-by-step navigation, and then I'll talk to you about what we're doing next and how you can potentially get involved and help us make this all happen. So in reality, we know that end-to-end services have many different shapes and sizes, and we need this navigation to work for all of them. So we have been testing and iterating the pattern with simple services and more complex ones. So we started with learning to drive, and this is a bit of a representation of what that kind of looks like across departments and topics. It's a relatively simple one, and we had some background work done by the service manual team to give us a good kickstart on this one. In reality, learning to drive step by step probably looks a bit more like this. It crosses over 3 or 4 departments and agencies, and although this part of the taxonomy hasn't been developed yet, we reckon it probably covers about 3 different topics. So that's to sort of give you an idea of the spread of content and where the majority of that content and those transactions sits within government, mostly with DBSA in this case. But after we'd worked on that, we had lots of questions about how to push and break this pattern and build on it and improve it. And the main one was, well, how do we actually handle more complex journeys? Because learning to drive a car is quite understood, it's quite linear, there's not that much complexity in the steps and ordering of the steps or the content itself. So how do we deal with more complex journeys, and how do we deal with choice or options within a journey where users might have to make decisions about which thing to do or which route they should take? So we then started looking at the divorce and separation. So Get a Divorce looks something like this. It covers more departments, a similar number of topics. But then we also looked at ending a civil partnership because we wanted to understand how services might overlap with each other, because the different processes often share the same content or transactions. So here they share some content around going to court, help with court fees, things like that. In the learning to drive a car journey, things like the applying for a provisional license, that transaction helps you apply for a car license, but also a motorbike license, a lorry license, minibus license. So that transaction is probably shared by quite a few journeys as well. So we wanted to understand, how do we deal with content and transactions that are shared? And how do we deal with more complex journeys? So if learning to drive a car looks more like this, Divorce is a lot more complex. It looks a bit more like this. Again, this is an approximation of the topics that might be developed, but we know which departments are involved, and it's quite a few. And there's also a lot of non-Gov UK content as well, which this navigation helps us link out to at the right place and the right time for users to do the things that they need to do off of Gov UK. Something else we found when we were mapping out the Get a Divorce journey and the Ending a Civil Partnership journey was that it flagged up that there are services within services. So we also looked at making child arrangements, which is an optional part of getting divorced, optional in that you might not have children even though you're getting divorced. But also you might need to make child arrangements if you're separating but you've never been married. So we were starting to understand how different chunks of processes might work together and how the navigation needed to work with those different sort of shapes of services. And we're going to continue working on the pattern with more examples to help us stretch it and develop it. But that's where we need you. I'll come back to that later because it's part of our plan for this quarter. But there's some stuff in the email I sent out that will help us with that. Okay, step-by-step navigation on Gov UK versus the task list pattern. You cry. Yes, there has been some confusion about the difference between the navigation we're developing and the task list pattern on the service manual. Here's the task list pattern on the service manual. This is a pattern for service teams to use when they need to chunk up long transactions and step users through them. So it helps users to work through a digital transaction that probably looks a bit like this. There's a lot of steps for them to complete that digital transaction online. Whereas the navigation, that doesn't, and all of this pattern in the service manual, this will sit behind a start page. This will sit within the stuff that you're building, the services that you're building behind start pages that are on Gov UK. The step-by-step navigation aims to pull together all of the stuff that sits around that transaction. And it's important that these designs remain quite distinct from each other because actually a user is going to come into contact with both of those designs in one sitting on Gov UK because they will see the end-to-end service mapped out. They'll see that step-by-step navigation on the transaction page, on the start page, but they'll also see the task list pattern within transactions once they've clicked on the start button and they've gone into the transaction itself. So I would say, just a shout out, please don't try and use the navigation pattern that we're developing within your services, because if they look similar but they're working in slightly different ways, or they're using similar elements but to do slightly different things, that's going to confuse users because they will see both of these things in one sitting. So I hope that clarifies a bit, but happy to answer more questions on that. Alright, my final few slides, as you can see. What's next for modelling services team? So we're in week 2 of this quarter. We've got about 9 weeks left. And this is what we want to do. So having developed and tested the pattern for step-by-step navigation, our goal is to create the tools, guidance and engagement process so that we can start building lots of them. So that's basically because we need to continue to build evidence that this approach is good, that it's working, that it's helpful, and the best way to do that is to publish more of them and track the results. We want to build evidence for the pattern rather than still working on really specific use cases. We need that sort of bulk evidence. So in order to do that, we need thing 4 on that list, which is create a pipeline for not task lists. They're not called task lists anymore. I should have corrected that. This is where the confusion is coming from, you see. Step-by-step publishing. So this is where you in the community come in. In the email I sent out with the streaming link, I've also sent a link to a form. We want to collect the ideas you have for end-to-end services that you think should be built on GovUK. So please fill that in, have a think, fill it in as many times as you like, and that will help us build up that pipeline of things to work on. And then we can start, once we've got candidates in the pipeline, we can start looking at what engagement do we need to do within the departments to get those things moving, who we need involved to map the service. Then we can publish them, get them live, and then start iterating them based on the usage data that we're seeing. So have a think, please fill in that form and get in touch with us with your ideas. That would be really helpful. We know that we need to resolve the navigation clash on guides before we start publishing a lot of these, so we're also focusing on that this quarter, because that is a potential blocker for us in terms of moving forwards with it. It's just an illustration of that clash again that I spoke about earlier, where we've got 1 to 6 steps down the side, but then we've got 1 to 8 chapters at the top. And that's always happening in cases where mainstream guides are trying to do the job that our navigation is now taking care of. And we're working with the navigation team objective to fix this. But yeah, we already have some ideas, so hopefully we can move quickly on that one. We also need to figure out how do we deal with that shared content or shared transactions that sit in multiple services, multiple end-to-end services. So we need to develop a sort of rule set for what navigation to show and when. This is a nicely abstracted version of a really ugly spreadsheet I put together about how this rule set might work based on whether you're coming from the service page itself, which is quite easy to do. We can use cookies. If we know where you're coming from, which service you're coming from, we can show you the right navigation. But because we know a lot of people come from somewhere else, like directly from Google or from Browse, it's not as easy for us to tell what specific service you might be on when that piece of content or that transaction sits in many places. So there are various things that we can use to work out this rule set, but we want to figure out what is the best thing to show to people that it's most useful for the thing that they're most likely to be doing, and how do we also give them routes to the other services that that thing might sit in if they're one of the sort of smaller use cases of that content. And in order to do all of that, we need to build a lightweight publishing tool for step-by-step navigation, because currently we are hard coding everything, which is very hard work, and we want to get to the position where content designers can start building these with service teams and content publishers from across government, and so that these can be edited and updated quickly based on the data and the usage data that's coming through. So I need a drink of water. I'm going to take questions. John, what have we got online?
Well, we've got a lot of questions.
I bet we have. Good, good.
These folks have been very, very good, firing lots of stuff for us, and a lot of nice familiar names here, so which is really good. So let's start with a question from Richard, Tricky Richard Payne in HMRC. What are the best methods as designers to break down organisational silos which can block effective service design like this?
Oh wow, that is a massive question. I mean, I think that is a challenge that is being tackled in many ways. The navigation, will hopefully go some way to exposing where those silos are not helping and where we need to work together more. But obviously also the service community's work is aiming to see from a top-down level, how do we actually break down those barriers from the start. And there's a lot more work going on in the services programme to deal with that, from even stating in things like the service standard how teams need to be working together. So it's a many-pronged attack to a very complex issue, but we're hoping that through this navigation and exposing where departments and teams are shared owners of an end-to-end service, that it will show them where they should be working together and the opportunities that working together has, hopefully.
Cool. Thank you very much. A couple of questions about the use of this on mobile devices. So what have been the particular challenges for designing this for mobile? And James asked, just wondered if positioning on the right-hand column of pages was already decided for the step-by-step. So I guess that's about the position of the navigational elements and designing.
Yeah. So actually, in terms of where it sits on when it's in the side navigation, it's not already decided, and there are, so the front end theme on GovUK, you're actually looking at what are the sort of component parts of pages across GovUK in the different formats, and where does navigation like this need to live. And so we don't necessarily own where it lives on the page, and they are going to do more testing and development of how all of the elements on GovUK pages fit together and how usable they are. They're going to do more of that this quarter, which is great, because that will hopefully improve how people use our navigation, as well as when it's sort of topics related links and things like that. What was the first question? About how it works on mobile?
Yeah, the particular challenges of designing for a mobile device.
Particular challenges. I mean, people use mobile and web very differently. Obviously, I mean, stating the obvious now, you all know this. But obviously, on the web, we are able to lay out that navigation down the side so that people see it as soon as they hit the page, and we're sort of able to introduce it to them and intercept their journey at a point where they've only just started engaging with the content. When it's on mobile, it sits at the bottom, and that's why we've started exploring things like the sticky navigation, which then sticks to the top of the screen and allows users to jump back to the main overview page of the end-to-end service. But I'm not sure, because from the accessibility testing we did on Tuesday, sticky navigation is very problematic. So that's one of the challenges. Having said that, we know that people on mobile are very scroll happy. And we know that people on desktop have a tendency to screen out anything that feels like ad space. So even though it's not on the screen when you first hit it on mobile, people are very happy to scroll down to it, and everyone discovered it, more or less. Whereas there were examples where people had screened it out on desktop because it was sitting in that classic ad space. So that there's kind of challenges on both. Yeah, there's no silver bullet to that one, but we're looking at how the sort of transition from like how does it fit on mobile, and how do all the elements fit together on mobile versus desktop, and it's something that we want to carry on working on. Like this current design is by no means fixed. We're going to continue developing it. We just need more examples to stretch it and test it and sort of break it, and we'll carry on.
Yeah, James agrees. Yeah, it's tricky, he says. So kind of following on from that a little bit, Constance and John Turnbull kind of asked a similar question to each other, which was, how do you deal, or how do we find out if this pattern deals with very complex, non-linear things? How do we stretch that pattern? How will we know when we can't deal with something, step by step?
So this is something that we've been talking to Home Office a bit as well about this, because obviously areas like benefits and visas, where there's quite complicated eligibility involved, that can give you lots of different offshoots to journeys and different routes you might take based on your situation. That's like the sort of next level complexity that we might start thinking about. But I think we're reassured by the fact that the like services within services navigation, where we had child arrangements within divorce, that worked. People got it and they were happy to navigate in that way. So oh god, my It's going to restart. That's the problem. People are happy to navigate in that way. So I think it's just a matter of understanding what are the shape of the services that sit in those more complicated domains look like, and I think we just need to do some sort of domain modelling for like visas and for benefits to see how those processes within those domains start fitting together. I think it's a case where you can, divorce, we can do that as a one-off and publish that as a one-off, more or less. But I think in terms of visas and benefits, you'd probably have to map a whole bunch of them and see how they fit together before publishing them as a group. I think that's what we need to figure out going forwards.
Cool, thank you. So Ange and Mark asked similar questions to each other. Ange said she's working on a GDS project for a department affecting organisations and their users. How does this apply to business content? And Mark asked, what can we do if an end-to-end user experience is partly outside government? So similar questions about how we deal with content that kind of maybe lies in a few areas, even off gov.uk perhaps.
Yeah, well, I'll answer that last question first. What we've seen is we're currently linking to things that are off of gov.uk in the Learn to Drive journey, and we're also doing that within the divorce journey, and it actually makes the sort of transition from gov.uk to those off gov.uk services a bit smoother, because we're very specific about the task that you are needing to achieve on the page that we're sending you to. So it's making those transitions much smoother. Obviously, the downside of going off gov.uk is you lose that on-page navigation for the step-by-step. But we've tested it, and people are sort of quite happy to go to a non-gov.uk page. They're reassured because they've been told to go there from gov.uk, and they are happy with the sort of task that they are about to do. So that is less problematic, and we can incorporate that stuff into the model fairly easily. So that's good. What was the other question? Sorry.
About business-to-business content on gov.uk,
right.
So different audience types as well.
Yeah, so I mean, as long as the content is on gov.uk and it is content that is a part of a process, then there's no reason why this pattern wouldn't work for any content that is on gov.uk and any processes that are housed on gov.uk. This isn't purely a citizen-facing thing, because of the groundwork that we've done to sort of pull all of the different content types and formats onto this single sort of platform. We can apply this navigation to any pages on gov.uk, which is it's taken us 2 years to get to that point, but it means that we can now do that sort of thing.
I guess that kind of speaks a little bit to sort of the other changes we've got coming with the page format, so adding it to specialist HTML publications.
Exactly, yeah.
So yes, Liz, it will be added to register as a chicken farmer if we have that content on gov.uk.
Love it.
We're almost out of time, so
okay.
One more question, and perhaps just to reiterate the final point of your presentation. How is the team planning on scaling this work and design? And perhaps how can people help with that?
Yeah, I think so. We want to move forwards as quickly as possible to get more services online, and to do that, we need to have lots of candidates for end-to-end services that we can build, and to get the ball rolling with engagement. Because when we're facing that problem of cross-government silos, and we're having to be the go-between between different departments, or even different teams within departments. So sometimes the engagement can be a bit of a slow process, which is why we want lots of ideas for services that we could build, so we can get the ball rolling on a lot of them and then move forwards with as many as possible, as quickly as possible. To do that, it'd be great if you could get in touch by filling in the form that I sent out in the email with the link to this live stream. In that form, we're asking, what services do you think would be good candidates for this stuff, and what problem you think it would help you to solve, and who you are and what department you come from, and then we'll be in touch and start trying to get those things into our backlog in order to build them, because by the end of this quarter, we would love to have a whole bunch more services on Gov.uk. So yeah, maybe some of your stuff could be a part of that batch, which would be really great. So get in touch.
Cool. Okay, that's 2 o'clock.
Okay, thanks guys. Any more questions that have come out, we'll try and answer through further communications, blog posts, things like that. But you can also get in touch with us on our modelling services email address. That was also in the email that I sent out, but I can share it again if people don't have access to it. And I'll send out the link to this as a recording for anyone who wasn't able to join, who you think would benefit from seeing this presentation. But thanks for joining, and hopefully I'll see you soon at some point. Cheers guys. Right.